Welcome to Shelf Help. Today we're speaking with Michael Marra, who is joining us from the Philly area. Michael's like a co-founder and principal at Butter Creative, which is a creative agency primarily focused on the cannabis space, working a lot around the dispensary retail environment. And prior to Butter, Michael spent a decade plus as an art director, design leader, doing work for big name brands like DKNY, Victoria's Secret, Johnson & Johnson, et cetera. So definitely got a lot of experience in the CPG and retail worlds. Let's get into it. So first off, Michael, just people that aren't that familiar with Butter Creative, and just maybe just give a quick lay of the land in terms of kind of the origin story, how you got the agency started, what the kind of core offerings you guys have, core services you focus on, and if you have any exciting milestones or whatnot you want to share that's been going on as of late, and then we'll go from there.
Cool. Yeah, thanks. I appreciate being on. So Butter started in 2018. Basically, a buddy of mine reached out and said that he had a friend that was moving to Philly, and he kind of linked us up. I had just moved from Brooklyn, and he was another guy running an agency, and he came to the offices and saw, at the time we were working with Dosis, doing a brand display project for them. And, it turned out that he was working primarily in cannabis at the time. So that was like 2018. And, we kind of hit it off, and we decided, well, let's try to partner up on a couple projects and see how it goes. And it went really well. And, I think we've been successful because our agency, his background is more in branding and packaging. And he, early on, he basically told me a number of his clients needed better merchandising solutions and displays. They were looking for that kind of work. They didn't do it. So that was an easy place to start. And I also had clients with more brand and packaging needs. So it was great. But I think we found success because, our collective team is comprised of 2D and 3D designers. And this is an industry that wants to move quick. So having that capability where we could take a brand, create a brand, apply it to packaging intentionally, and then think about how it lives on shelf, as well as branding for full retail spaces. So that's really the origin of Butter. Yeah, I think our sweet spot is really branding as it's applied to packaging and retail. So kind of that space there.
I know you already jumped into cannabis, spent a fair amount of time working on in-store merchandising, POP, general store design stuff for some of those big brands like I mentioned. I'm curious, what were some of the key things you always had top of mind when you were doing this kind of work for some of these, let's just say, traditional brands outside of the cannabis space?
Yeah, I mean, so it really depends on the type of brand or retailer, right? So and it's different in I think there's a lot of opportunity in cannabis. I noticed pretty quickly that a lot of retailers, left a lot of white space. They left a lot of room for improvement, let's say. Some of the things in traditional retail is, what we would do at like Aveda, for example, is, you'd run a marketing campaign. That campaign would show up in various touch points. And then when you got to the store level, it would show up as well. So like new and notable product would usually be front of house on what we call a launch pad. So you're getting that continuity of brand message and voice and marketing. And then the touch points in the store also are very intentionally merchandised and presented to the client in a way that really carries customer experience from, what would be online into the built environment. So that wasn't really happening at all in cannabis. But, I think the way that we approach it is take some of those best practices, things like cross merchandising, creating bundles, being very intentional with the sight lines in the store, thinking about signage and wayfinding, and really trying to create an experience that, can thoughtfully guide a customer to purchase ultimately. those are some of the cues I would say from traditional retail. I think where I see a lot of opportunity is really like thinking about the intention of how the store is laid out. What kind of started with the industry, and this is a common scenario, is that people open a store, especially in a new market, and they might just want to, maybe they'll build a cool store and it's like, it's cool design, but they kind of just assume that the product sells itself, and maybe that works for a short time, and then you're basically competing on price, and it's a very transactional thing at that time. But really trying to fill in the gaps of, how do I make this more meaningful and engaging for customers so that they actually feel like, it's a memorable and meaningful experience. Cannabis is difficult because, a lot of markets will have things like a lobby space where you walk in and you show your ID, and it's kind of like, okay, well, what is this experience? It's almost, like a doctor's office. Then you go into a lobby. It feels like a doctor's office. And then you go into the retail floor, maybe there's no real browsing. There's a few display cases with random product. And then, you may go to the Budtender. And if you're new to cannabis, it's not a great place to start, because then you're already at the POS. You feel the pressure of the person behind you waiting in line. It's just not a good experience. So all those little pieces, all those touch points that lead you there, that's where we like to go deep.
Yeah. Dive into that a bit more. I mean, you kind of touched on it a little bit, but I think you think about various types of dispensaries. Yeah, there's some that, I guess like thinking about like the old MedMed and WeHo, where we're just kind of walking. There's display cases throughout the middle of the store. You could just kind of peruse around, walk around as you want. There are employees that come up to you and with the iPad and kind of ask what you wanted. You make those other ones that are a bit more intentional in terms of, you walk in and it kind of takes you through like the equivalent of like what IKEA is, where it has a pretty defined path where it takes you through and that puts you in front of all the different product categories. By the time you get to the front, I'm curious, what does like the ideal customer journey or flow look like in a dispensary, and what does it feel like operators are still really missing today?
Well, I think a lot of operators will merchandise by category. So you will go into dispensary, and it's not uncommon to find like the vape section or the edibles or the flower bar or whatever it is. So I think that does exist today. I think the way that you can make that a better experience is maybe pulling out of those things, or finding certain benefits that you hear that your customers are seeking out, right? So like, one of the first things we'll do when we work with a dispensary client is we'll start with trying to really understand from the Budtenders perspective, like what are they hearing clients or customers ask for? Like, what are some of the common things that they're finding to be true with customers, whether it's like, a lot of people in this market can't sleep, or they have, pain management, or like, they're just looking for a specific product type, whether it's like low THC or high THC. Maybe they're just searching for value. Maybe at the end of the day, they just want to know what you like, So like, right there, you have, 4 or 5 different merchandising opportunities. You can have like a top seller section in your store. You could have a staff pick section in your store. You can have things like, creating product groupings based on benefits like sleep or focus or relief or whatever. It's really, there's a ton of opportunity there. And then for the customers, that the other benefit of merchandising with, kind of showcasing that outcome or that benefit would be that you could start cross merchandising different product categories that then might open up. Let's say a customer that was only buying previously would come in for gummies because it's a very easy entry, and maybe they're new to cannabis. That would be something where you can, maybe show some tincture merchandise with the gummies that has a similar kind of effect, or at least has, something that allows them to kind of open up to a new thing. But something very simple like identifying staff favorites is like something that everyone should be doing. And it's also like about building trust, right? Like I think when you go to a store and maybe the thing that got you in that store, whether it was a social media post or whatever, maybe there was a certain deal that kind of brought them in. You should see that again when you're in the store. And when it starts to repeat and the branding matches and the way that you're speaking starts to connect to the customer, the shopping experience really starts online. So that's really the other thing that we always look at is like, well, how are you categorizing product? Does it even make sense to have a sleep benefit? How are you communicating to your customer online? And then what from that do we want to try to translate into the store? Or, what in the store makes sense to bring into the online experience? And then you start to create a brand that's a little bit more enriched, there's a little more substance to it. There's continuity that can really help create a trust with the consumer.
Yeah. Looking at a bit more to say specific scenarios, because I guess this is not just the cannabis space, but in terms of dispensary specifically, the size and the layout can vary pretty widely from the 500 square foot bodega type shop all the way to the huge Planet 13 megastores, which I know you've done some work on. So dive into a bit more detail. Let's look at that smaller, let's just say 500 square foot small bodega shop. Like, how do you, thinking about that from a tactical specific level, how do you maximize the layout of that small bodega shop that's, let's just say 500 square feet?
It's funny. It's interesting. Like I think with spaces like that, like a small bodega type store, I think has a nice opportunity to create a very like curated experience that you don't want to over merchandise product. I mean, that's another kind of big thing that is a mistake. A lot of these, especially like the larger ones that don't know what to put on shelf, they'll put like a lot of product. Well, even if it's behind glass, they'll like load up the display case, and the perceived value is affected by something like that. So having very intentionally merchandised displays where there's a focus on the product and it's elevated and supported with collateral that helps either tell a story or just informs the customer a little bit more is really important. So, I think for any space, the navigation and the wayfinding is critical, and that, again, that's like that starting with the website. But then when you're going to the store, what is the signage? What's the first thing I see? What's the queue? Where am I waiting in line? Like help guide that experience. And I think with the smaller stores, maybe that's a little bit simpler in a sense. But when you walk into that store, you should be very thoughtful about what is in front of you. What are the sight lines of the store? So like you walk in the door, what's straight ahead is going to be really important. It's interesting. In the United States, there's a tendency, maybe it's because we drive on the right side of the road, but there's a tendency to kind of veer to the right. So like just knowing like what is the customer behavior and then really being very thoughtful about like what is being shown in that place in the store can be helpful. And for me, what I always encourage people to do is to make that, especially if it's a new market, make it about education. Make it about, if someone's new to cannabis and they haven't shopped it before, like let's give them something to kind of start with. And what that might be is a display, often we'll think about things like onset and duration, so like how quick will this vape product work versus a flower product or an edible, or like what does an eighth look like? Like how much product is that? So like starting to answer the questions in advance to them being asked to the bud tender is really a great way to start thinking about what are those tools? What are the tools that are going to make this experience better? Because ultimately, that's the goal. The goal is to create an engaging experience, and then that person comes back. If they feel like they're smarter from being in your store, then that's a good thing. And if they feel like they're now informed in a way that they'll want to come back, hopefully. So I think in a small store there's limitations, but sometimes those limitations can really be a blessing, because then you really get to just focus in on the important pieces. Sometimes the bigger stores can be a lot more challenging.
How do you approach that huge blank slate, like a Planet 13 example? And maybe for those that don't know what Planet 13, maybe paint the picture of exactly how big that store is. And I know you did some work in that, so maybe whatever you feel comfortable talking through, like what actually stuff you did there and how that relates.
Yeah, we've done some work with Planet 13. We haven't done any full retail design for them, but looking at the spaces, it's more of a, often that kind of space might be divided up like shop and shops. And shop and shops are unique in the sense that well, it's not unique. I mean, they've always existed. You go to Macy's or you go to any kind of department store, it's a lot of that kind of thing. So, I think there's opportunity for perhaps a different kind of experience where maybe it could become more brand focused. I think a Planet 13 has an opportunity to create more of an experience that is unique because of the volume of the space. Like you can have like interesting mobiles, or you can have like, just areas of engagement, whether it's like like a place to play video games or like, kind of do something. So it's a very different intention. I think it also really requires some thoughtful wayfinding, right? So like you got having a big cavernous space with a lot of stuff going on is cool. It's interesting, is action, but like you still need to try to guide a customer to what it is you want them to see, or what it is that they want to see, like why are they there? And it gets back to like knowing your customer. Who are the customers that are going to Planet 13? There's a number of stores that they have. I know, the big ones in Vegas, and that's a different space. That's a different market. And the customer going to the Vegas store, is probably different than someone at a California store or some other market.
I saw you alluded to this a bit earlier. I saw that you posted or shared a LinkedIn post a few weeks ago where you said something along the lines of your budtenders are not your merchandising strategy. Kind of curious what you meant by this and what are brands missing in this context?
Yeah, it's not a dig at budtenders. What I was trying to say is that you can't rely on your budtender to be knowledgeable in a way that helps make every sale. I think obviously, ideally, your staff is super important, and you should have a well-educated staff that can speak with confidence and clarity to customers. But it kind of gets back to my earlier point of just trying to have that conversation before they even get to the budtender, because a lot of these questions that they're asking they're repeating the same question. So let's create an environment that answers that question in an interesting way. And then makes the customer feel like, oh, these guys get me. Like that's kind of what I'm wondering. And then when they go to the bud tender, it's a little bit less of a pressure because they have something to talk about, right? Because like maybe someone went in a dispensary and they weren't thinking about their arthritis or something, and they see like, okay, pain management, this is interesting, or like understanding what terpenes have what effects, that can help increase basket size. That's something that, I think that's not necessarily like the, your North Star is selling more, but I think serving more. And I think being able to, you know, meet the customer where they are is important. And I think you can't just rely on your staff to do that for you. Or it becomes just, like I said, a transactional experience. And then you compete on price, and competing on price it's a race to the bottom. There's nothing there of substance.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What's the key to designing an actual successful shop and shop within a dispensary? And I guess defining success in terms of ones you've seen the data after they've been installed, and brands it's actually driven an increase in sales.
Yeah, I mean, so shop and shops are they almost become, it's like it's a celebration of your brand. It's creating a full experience, and it allows you as a brand to really decide what that experience could and should be. I think that the ROI is sometimes hard to track. It depends on the market and what's being presented. But I think, overall, having a place that represents your brand and shows it in a physical, in an environment and in the context of being able to walk into, I think that there's a lot that, our experience has been when we do those kind of spaces, it's often a lot of the, it tends to be motivating for the teams that represent that brand, because now they have like, something that they could physically go to and be proud of and see in their space. But I think it undoubtedly elevates you in an environment that maybe has a bunch of those things going on. One thing in terms of like quantifying it, I haven't deployed this yet, but we've been talking to a number of groups about different options with digital signage and AI tracking and lighting and such. So like, there are ways of tracking engagement with, would basically be like a spotlight, where you could kind of target certain aspects or areas of your store, or if it was a shop and shop, and track the engagement that's happening there. And then you can kind of use that as a lever to start to make adjustments, which everyone should be doing. I think there's also a danger of trying to make too many adjustments at once. And I think, I'll see dispensaries store, and I know I'm jumping back from brand to dispensary, and they are different, but I'll see dispensaries where like every POS is like different product. And I think that's, there's a certain message at a POS that you want to convey. People already had their shopping experience, or they already know what they're buying. They're there to pick up, basically. So if there's going to be any other selling or any other presentation of product, it's impulse buy. So loading up a POS and then making each one a different group of product is very difficult to track the performance of the display, track the performance of the product, because it all depends on who's there and then who the budtender is. So like, finding some simplicity and a framework for selling product is really the place that we like to go with our clients. We like to say, all right, what are our goals? What are the marketing goals? Like, let's just put that out in the world. Because that's another thing in traditional retail that we always have, is like the calendars is 12 months, 16 months, in some cases even longer than that. But, being able to like look at what are the period promotions, and then how are we going to think about that in store, or like, it's funny. I'm kind of going off on a little bit of a tangent. I hope that's okay. Yeah. But thinking about like what we did in like in traditional retail, I've worked with a lot of beauty brands, and it's interesting. Beauty is probably the industry, in my opinion, that's most closely connected or parallels cannabis. Usually people go to liquor and wine and stuff, and I get that, but I think of beauty because I think it's the scale of the product. I think it's the personal experience. Like, it may be you might need a consultant to kind of help you guide that process, like especially like with skincare products or like navigating different strain types. There's the perceived value of the product, but then there's also the packaging, right? Like the packaging is almost the same. Like you got Mylar bags, you got tinctures, you got jars, you got boxes, and they're all the same scale. You got pens, you have drams. So like those elements, coupled with the experience and the need to make it kind of personal, I think is great. And that's we get a lot of our inspiration for the way that we merchandise, the way we think about space from that industry, from the beauty industry.
I wrote a small check into a technology company, I think back in 2021, that was just solving a problem that I had seen when I was running a cannabis company in the past, that basically does a lot of helps track and implement retail employee incentive programs. And they started in cannabis And then the first vertically expanded out into, I think their first partnership outside of cannabis was with Sephora. So interesting that you say that their first foray out of cannabis was beauty too.
I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah.
It's the same scale, and even like the in-store experience could be very similar. And a lot of dispensaries also in beauty, a Sephora will section out a store by brand essentially. And a lot of cannabis dispensaries do the same thing, which it makes sense because then they're able to kind of tell a brand, hey, this is your space. But then you start losing control over, like, as a retailer, you start losing control over the store. You start losing control over the aesthetic and the look of your store. So part of what we like to do is create a framework where you're able to not only elevate the brand, but put some guardrails on it.
At some point in your journey, you launched the Butter Groove system. And then I think a little while after that, the Flip display system, which kind of, I guess I would define as, I think as you guys define it, kind of a plug and play merchandising kit. So I'm curious what led you guys to launch these two merchandising tools, and what exactly are they, and then what kind of led you to launch them, and how does it work? We'll start there.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'll start with the Flip display, and I'll give you the evolution. But essentially, what we did was we created a kit of parts merchandising solution specifically for cannabis brands and cannabis product. It was designed with the principles in mind of being flexible, working on shelf and under counter, being modular, so being able to expand if it's like a 6-inch space at a POS or a full shelf takeover or even more. And then, being able to make it very easy to update. That's where I'm very excited about it. It's something that, and we produce it. We have domestic production partners, and it's cool to design and build out this product. And I think what I love about it is that because it's all magnetic, it really allows us full flexibility to do whatever we want on it. So any brand can really do whatever they want. Actually, recently we started doing 3D printing, which is cool because then you could do like very customized, like, pen holder displays and different things that we could do in very short runs. So that's very cool. But the reason we built it was really because we kept hearing the same thing over and over again. We kept hearing our clients just, project the same pain points to us over and over again, that they don't know where they're going to be in the store. They don't know the size of the space that they're going to be in. Their packaging is always changing. Their brand is changing. They need an affordable solution that it really just grows at the pace that cannabis brands grow. So that was really what drove us to solve that. And I started with the Flip system because that's really where I think it's really a really effective tool we're finding for our clients and for the brands that use it. It started with those same principles. We started with this Groove system version, which as we developed it, it's a bit more pieces, where the Flip is really a piece. It's like a one-piece display, but you can add components, backer cards. You could add stuff to it as you need to, but it's fully functional with one piece. The Groove system was one that had these grooves cut in that take collateral, and then you can lay down the collateral, and then they're stood up with stands, and it does all the same things in the sense that it stands up product in a nice way. But it's just in a different way that involves more parts and pieces. So where we've evolved it is really into more of an ecosystem of merchandising pieces. So the Groove display is really primarily our Groove trays or shelves now, and our Flip displays actually plug into those trays as well. So like all the pieces work together. The way I think about the Flip, if you're thinking about like for brands, it makes sense because using the magnet makes it look really premium. And although they're affordable to swap out, like it just has a more elevated look. You're not doing it, maybe you're doing it quarterly, or if you have a new product launch, you don't need to swap these things out all the time. So it's more evergreen. And, on the retail side, I think about that as like, if it's like a display that's like a sleep display or something, right? Or like, where you can just put different product and then swap it out and change it. But the groove is really effective. People love it. Like you're able to we drop in signage on it. You can drop collateral in it. And then, it's easy to just swap out graphics. It's a little bit more of something where, you can print on site and make those updates. And we've had a lot of success with that on the dispensary level. But all these pieces, these components, they work together. They work together and that's kind of, that was kind of it was a fun evolution. As we're developing, we're thinking of the things that we have and the customers that have them. And we're trying to solve the problems that we're hearing in a way that allows versatility and flexibility and, ease operations ultimately, but create an engaging experience for customers.
Do you guys have anything you're willing to share? If you are working on anything, do you guys have any, the next iteration or next addition to this kind of plug and play merchandising kit thing? Any other tools you guys have in the works?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we're actually in the middle of an install for Nova Farms in Massachusetts. They have a new store opening in Attleboro they're deploying this system, and we have this new outrigger version where it has the shadow box. We have shadow boxes that are basically these larger displays. Think of it like we were inspired by like movie posters, right? Like at the theater, you'd have like those kind of deep set movie posters, but it's for products essentially. And the large magnet swaps out. You could also, there's magnetic shelves that can attach. It's really fun, but all that stuff works together. So we're excited. So for Nova Farms, we designed the store. So like, the interior, all the finished selects and everything that goes into interior space. But then like what I'm really excited about is the toolkit, that like the merchandising toolkit and deploying it. And they have 10 brands and they're all on flip displays, and they're able to, for the wholesale side of things, it makes it a lot easier because you could put a bunch of these in a small box and ship them to your sales team. And, and they're easy to swap out. You can even swap out the different brands. So
totally. That sounds really cool.
Yeah.
A bit more of taking a 40,000 foot view, taking a step back, more of a broad question. What does the future of cannabis retail look like in your mind from a design standpoint or anything else that jumps out?
Yeah, I mean, I think the future of all retail is going to be about experience. I think, I think in cannabis, especially, I think, you want to give people a reason to come into the dispensary, especially if they could order online or whatever. But I think engaging people in that way is smart. Like we have clients that have like secret menus where you have to go in the store to find out what it is. But I think, ultimately, human beings if you're going to go to a space, you either want to engage with the people or the surrounding or the environment. And I feel like retail needs to create unique experiences that are memorable and make people want to be there. And I think you do that with creating an environment that's approachable, making it familiar. We talked about like the hurdles of like the way that most stores are kind of set up, where I think things like setting the tone early in a retail experience is very important. And I think that could be something like, even having music playing, like, just kind of creates a different vibe right out the gate, And I think as retailers start to recognize that, and these aren't new ideas. These are things that have existed in traditional retail forever. But I think that cannabis dispensary brands are starting to catch up to the reality that, it's got to be, you have to consider the experience. You have to consider how you're presenting to the client and or to the customer, and you want to make it something that, really increases engagement, So I think that's where it goes. But I think, there's also there's other opportunities that connect in retail, whether it's like thinking about, culinary opportunities or lounges or like, there's like cannabis retail kind of adjacent businesses that I think might start to kind of create more of a ecosystem that can kind of feed one another. And there's that lifestyle kind of aspect to it that I feel like hasn't been figured out. And that's interesting.
Well, that last question for you, any brands or any specific brands or just trends in general in the broader cannabis or hemp space that you're kind of particularly excited about or tracking?
I think a lot of people are excited about beverages. I've always been very bullish on the idea of a beverage, and it seems like it's finally like really getting traction in a meaningful way. So that's cool to see. I think that's probably the biggest one in my mind is like seeing the
Yeah.
beverage category just expand and kind of become, kind of grow into its own.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, yeah, Michael, this has been awesome. Really appreciate the time. You got really good insights in terms of cannabis retail and what works, what doesn't work well. So what's the best way for people to follow along with you and then also follow along with Butter as well?
Yeah, we're at buttercreative.com, Mike at buttercreative.com. And we're on Instagram, buttercreative. And that's the easiest way to kind of get in touch.
Looking forward to sharing this out with the world.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.